The karate didn't trust easily. For 3 generations, they had watched the stars with suspicion, their feline eyes tracking every ship that dared approach their world. When the human expedition landed in the Northern Territories, Kale had been the first to advocate for their immediate expulsion. As the pack's alpha, his word carried the weight of tradition and survival instinct combined. But Lyra had ignored the warnings. The storm had come without mercy, tearing through the research camp with winds that bent the reinforced tent poles like grass stalks. Most of the human team had retreated to the shuttle, but Lyra remained behind, checking equipment, securing samples, doing what humans always did, refusing to abandon their work even when nature itself commanded retreat. That's when she heard them. The mewling was barely audible over the howling wind, a desperate sound that cut through the chaos. Lyra's headlamp caught the reflection of 4 pairs of eyes huddled beneath an overturned supply crate. Karate cubs, no more than a few weeks old, their fur matted with rain and mud. Alone, abandoned in the storm, she didn't hesitate. That was the thing about humans that the karate could never quite understand. They didn't calculate survival probabilities before acting. They simply moved. Lyra scooped the cubs into her arms, their tiny claws instinctively gripping her jacket as she ran through the deluge. Her tent was small, meant for one person, but she made room. She wrapped them in thermal blankets, used her own body heat to warm them, and rationed her emergency supplies to feed them through the night. The cubs should have been terrified. Every xenobiological protocol suggested that infant karate would reject alien contact, that their predatory instincts would trigger defensive aggression even at such a young age. But as Lyra hummed softly, some old earth lullaby she'd learned from her grandmother, the cubs began to purr. It was a sound that vibrated through her chest, a rhythm that matched something primal in her own biology. She named them in whispers: Storm, Shadow, Star, Hope.by Dawn. The tempest had passed, leaving the camp a wreckage of twisted metal and scattered equipment. Lyra emerged from her tent with the cubs still clinging to her, their fear replaced by curious wonder. They watched the camp with wide eyes, their small heads swiveling to track every movement of the human crew as they assessed the damage. That's when Kale found them. He materialized from the tree line like a living shadow, his massive form moving with the fluid grace that marked him as a warrior of the highest rank. His fur, a deep obsidian marked with silver patterns of ancestral honor, bristled as he spotted the human holding his pack's missing cubs. The karate alpha had spent the entire night searching, his hunters spread across kilometers of hostile terrain. 3 cubs lost in the storm, 3 futures of his pack, possibly dead. And now here they were, nestled against the chest of an alien, watching the human camp as if they belonged there. Lyra saw him immediately. She didn't run, didn't call for help. She simply stood there, meeting his gaze with that peculiar human directness that the karate found both insulting and fascinating. They were alone, she said in careful karate, her accent mangling the purring consonants. The storm. I couldn't leave them. Kale's claws extended, scoring the soft earth. By every law of his people, this was a transgression. The human had touched their young, contaminated them with alien scent, violated the most sacred boundary of pack territory. He should attack, should reclaim the cubs and drive the humans from this world forever. But the cubs weren't crying. They weren't struggling. Storm, the largest of the 3, looked at Kale with recognition. This was Alpha. This was safety, but made no move to leave Lyra's arms. Shadow and Star actually turned away from him, pressing closer to the human's warmth. And Hope, the smallest, the one Kale had feared was already dead, was purring so loudly that he could hear it from 5 meters away. You fed them, Kale growled, the words coming out harsher than he intended. They were hungry. Lyra's response was simple, matter of fact, as if the answer was so obvious that the question itself was absurd. You warmed them. They were cold. You stayed in the storm. Alone. For cubs that are not your own species. Lyra tilted her head, and Kale saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Not defiance, not pride, but genuine confusion. What else would I do? The question hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Kale's entire worldview was built on pack loyalty, on the understanding that survival meant protecting one's own above all else. The karate had learned this lesson through centuries of warfare, through the scars of betrayal and the bitter knowledge that trust was a luxury that led to extinction. They had rejected the galactic community, turned away aid, built walls of isolation because the universe had proven, again and again, that others could not be trusted. But here was a human, soft, fragile, with no claws or fangs or natural armor, who had risked her life for children of another species simply because they needed help. No treaty obligated her. No law required it. She had gained nothing and risked everything. That IT was the most alien thing Kale had ever witnessed. And the most familiar. Slowly, carefully, he approached. The cubs recognized his scent now, chirping in greeting, but still they remained with Lyra. She didn't pull away as Kale drew close enough to strike, close enough to kill. Instead, she knelt, lowering herself to make the transfer easier, showing submission and trust in equal measure. "We thought humans were like the others," Kale said quietly, his voice losing its growl. "The consortium that came before you. They wanted our minerals, our land. They spoke of partnership, but meant exploitation. We learned to see all outsiders as the same." Lyra carefully passed him the cubs, one by one. They protested, leaving her warmth, but responded to Kale's touch with the deep instinct of pack recognition. When Hope was the last one, Lyra hesitated. "Maybe we're not so different," she said. "Your pack protects its own. But who decides who counts as your own? Storm and Shadow and Star and Hope. I know they're not mine. But last night, in that storm, they were just scared children who needed help. That was enough." Kale took Hope gently in his jaws, the cub settling immediately against his warmth. He looked at Lyra for a long moment, seeing not an alien, but a person who understood the most fundamental law of the universe. That compassion was not weakness, but the strongest force in existence. "The council will hear of this," he said finally. "They will want to meet you, to understand how humans can be so foolish as to risk themselves for strangers." Lyra smiled. "We call it humanity. It's not always logical, but it's gotten us pretty far." As Kale turned to leave, cubs secure in his care, he paused. "Lyra, that is your name. Yes, you will come to the gathering tonight. You will be honored as pack friend. This is not a request." He disappeared into the forest, his pack emerging from the shadows to surround him, to welcome the cubs home. But before the trees swallowed him completely, Kale looked back one last time. The human was still watching, still standing in the ruins of her camp, covered in mud and exhausted from a sleepless night. She raised one hand in farewell, and Kale saw in her not a threat to be eliminated, but a bridge to a future his people had never imagined possible. Perhaps, he thought, the most dangerous thing about humans wasn't their weapons or their technology. It was their stubborn, illogical, beautiful refusal to see the universe as a place where kindness was weakness. And perhaps, just perhaps, the karate had been wrong about what it meant to survive.